the betrayal of Judas. Shortly after Jesus and John Mark left the camp, Judas Iscariot disappeared from the company of his brothers and didn't return until late in the afternoon. Despite Jesus' explicit request not to go into Jerusalem, this dissatisfied apostle went to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. That morning, an unofficial meeting of the Sanhedrin was taking place at Caiaphas' house. This meeting was convened to draft a legal charge against Jesus that was serious enough to sentence him to death. This was necessary to convince the Roman authorities. The previous day, Judas had revealed to some of his relatives that he had come to the conclusion that, although Jesus was a well-meaning dreamer and idealist, he was not the expected Redeemer of Israel. Judas declared that he would very much like to find a way to withdraw from the Jesus movement with dignity. His old friends assured him in flattering tones that his departure would be welcomed as a great event by the Jewish leaders. They made him believe that he would immediately receive high honors from the Sanhedrin and that he could completely clear his name from the stigma of his well-intentioned but unfortunate association with those uneducated Galileans. Judas could not accept that the mighty works of Jesus were performed by the power of the prince of demons, but he was now fully convinced that Jesus would not use his power for self-glorification. He had finally become convinced that Jesus would allow the Jewish leaders to remove him, and he could not bear the humiliating thought of being associated with a defeated movement. He knew his master's strong character and the sharpness of his majestic mind very well, but it pleased him to partially agree with the suggestion of one of his relatives that Jesus was a well-meaning fanatic, but probably not quite right in his mind, that he had always been a strange, misunderstood man. Often the behavior of the other apostles had irritated him, and there was a recurring feeling of contempt for his brothers, so much so that he longed to make them pay. He had set out to obtain restoration of honor for himself, and if he could achieve this by also taking revenge on those who had contributed to the greatest disappointment of his life, then that was a bonus. Terrible feelings of confusion, pride, despair, and determination conspired. Let it be clear here that Judas was not motivated by money when he set out to betray Jesus at the house of Caiaphas. He was, however, determined to acquire as much fame and honor for himself as possible. This was a sort of compensation because one of the driving forces behind his initial involvement with Jesus and the new gospel of the kingdom had been the self-centered thought that there would be a high position in the new kingdom for him, which would bring him much fame and honor. Most of the apostles had once shared this ambition with Judas, but over time they learned to admire the truth more and to love Jesus, at least more than Judas did. Judas was introduced to Caiaphas and the Jewish leaders by his cousin, who explained that Judas had come to realize that he had made a mistake in being seduced by the deceitful teachings of Jesus, and that he was now ready to formally and openly renounce his association with the Galilean. This spokesperson for Judas further explained that Judas understood it would be best for the peace of Israel if Jesus were to be taken into custody. As a token of regret for having participated in such a misguided movement, he had now come to offer his services to the Sanhedrin. He could provide the captain of the temple guard with information that would allow Jesus to be quietly arrested without the people getting wind of it. With this offer, there would be no need to delay his arrest until after the Passover feast. When his cousin stopped speaking, Judas stepped forward and said, "Everything my cousin has said is true, but what are you willing to give me for my services?" Judas seemed not to notice the look of contempt that appeared on the face of the hard-hearted Caiaphas. His heart was too focused on glory for himself and the thirst for recognition. Caiaphas then looked down at the traitor and said, "Judas, go to the captain of the temple guard and arrange with him that you bring your master to us tonight or tomorrow night under cover of darkness. When he is delivered to us by you, you will receive a great reward." When Judas heard this, he left the company of the chief priests to consult with the captain of the temple guard on how Jesus should be arrested. Judas knew that Jesus was not in the camp at that moment, and he had no idea when he would return that evening. so they agreed to arrest Jesus the following evening, after the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all the pilgrims had gone to bed. Drunk with thoughts of greatness and glory, as he had not had in many days, Judas returned to his companions in the camp. He had joined Jesus, hoping to become a great man in the new kingdom. He had finally realized that there would be no new earthly kingdom. He was no longer guided by truth, but his inner drive was his selfish ego, which only thought of his own safety and glory. His own will was blind to the devastating effect of his self-centered actions. Judas had lost the inner struggle. The selfish and vengeful thoughts that continually arose within him, he had too often fed out of self-pity, making them stronger and stronger within him. In his heart, he harbored hateful and evil desires for revenge. Jesus had always loved Judas and trusted him, just as he loved and trusted the other apostles. But Judas failed to develop loyal trust in return and to feel genuine reciprocal love. And how dangerous is the will of a selfishly ambitious person when their highest motivation is nothing more than a stubborn, long-suppressed desire for revenge and glory. What a devastating effect disappointment has on the lives of fools who allow themselves to be fascinated by shadowy and fleeting things, thereby rejecting the living truth that stands ready to elevate them to eternal worlds and true spiritual realities. Judas longed in his mind for worldly honor, and this grew stronger until he loved this desire with all his heart. The other apostles also longed in their minds for the same worldly honor, but in their hearts they had come to love Jesus, and they did their best to also love the truths he taught. Judas had not grown up in a loving home, and as a child he was rarely affirmed by those around him. From a young age, he had developed a closed character out of self-defense. He spoke to no one about what troubled him inside, but inwardly he often overflowed with self-pity. Even in all the years he spent with Jesus, he had refused to allow himself to be discipled. He never sought help for his inner problems. He had joined the apostles somewhat by chance, but every time he thought he had reason to have high expectations, Jesus said or did something that made him feel offended. In Judas's heart, there remained a constant scar of bitter resentment. As these scars increased in number, this heart, which had so often been wounded, lost all real affection for the one who had caused him these unpleasant experiences. Judas did not realize it, but he was a coward. He had never been honest enough with himself to face this. Instead, he distorted everything whenever confronted with the truth. Through distortion, he projected his shortcomings onto Jesus. He was always inclined to attribute cowardice to Jesus because Jesus so often refused to seize power or because he refrained from earthly glory. He had often been annoyed by this, especially after moments when power had seemingly been within reach, such as during the miraculous feeding or the recent triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Unfortunately, almost every mortal knows all too well how love, even when it was once real, can eventually turn into actual hatred through disappointment, jealousy, and long-held resentment. The chief priests were pleased with Judas. For now, they would not have to arrest Jesus in public, and with an insider, the chance that Jesus would not be able to escape to another jurisdiction was increased.